Thank you everyone for joining us today on the Wet Center webinar series. Today we'll be discussing some of the reasons experienced founders have twice the likelihood of an exit compared to more inexperienced founders. This week we have entrepreneur, researcher, UC Berkeley faculty member, and coach Stephen Torres to help us uncover the foundational reason why this statistic rings true and why this is relevant to your entrepreneurial journey. Stephen Torres is the founder of two successfully exited startups in the energy sector and will be sharing his insight and research into the patterns of thinking exhibited by successful founders and the attributes of their psychology that led to a higher likelihood of an exit. Stephen's research and experience have led him to the conclusion that this success-oriented framework of thinking possessed by founders with multiple exits can be developed in first-time founders. He'll be sharing with you how you can implement these lessons for yourself. So, Stephen, just to kick us off, would you mind sharing some insights? I'd love to hear your story, your entrepreneurial journey, and then kind of what you're doing today to support entrepreneurs.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you, Benjamin, for having me. Grace for hosting this, and of course, thank all of you for joining this. It's always fun to be able to share some of these things that I've picked up, and everything that I share. Just so that you know, I always like to say this to my students and to other people. But everything that I share is it's a way, it's not the way. Meaning, the stuff that I went through was relevant to me at the time, may or may not work for you. And so you have to, as an entrepreneur, be able to decipher all of these things that are coming your way as far as information and what someone else's journey was and how it really relates to your journey. So I'll start with there. I'll give you my background. I'm obviously from Fresno. I'm not sure if you all know that. I grew up in the area and did my studies at UC Berkeley for my undergrad and then Cornell for my MBA. But I actually started off in the work world in consumer products and sales and marketing actually, and did a lot of work in that realm, if you will, and moved up the ladder, ended up being inducted to the Hall of Fame as a sales manager and did some pretty good work there. After that is when I actually got into technology at a startup out here. And this is, I think the other thing I should mention is almost my entire career has been based here in the Bay Area, what would be considered Silicon Valley. So I have this bias and this mindset of what the environment I've been around. But that was a really fun and exciting time. It was a high growth startup. We started when I joined them. They were growing, and we had an IPO and all those fun things. So that was exciting. After that, I got into renewables, specifically clean tech and solar. And was more sales and marketing, was director of sales and marketing for a company out here in the Bay Area. And then went to business school, and it was actually in business school where I started my first company. It was called PV Solar Report. We were doing data and analytics specifically on the solar sector, focusing on the primarily residential solar sector in the United States. I kept doing that after graduating with my MBA. One of my classmates actually joined me, and we spun off another company that was a customer acquisition platform. And both of those companies were acquired. Then I got a chance to work for a really heavy hitter as far as a clean tech investor here in the Bay Area. He's among the top, globally. And worked for him for a few months as COO for one of his portfolio companies. And then after that, about 2 years as CEO for him, where I got to work directly with him. This is a guy that's had nearly $1 billion of exits. And in the renewable and clean tech space,
Yeah,
that's a big deal.
It really is.
They call it the solar coaster for a reason. And so guy just was a really amazing individual, and got to learn so much from him. And, of course, being immersed here, I started teaching actually at UC Berkeley back in 2016. One of my professors as an undergrad had invited me back, kept inviting me back for these boot camps that we would have for entrepreneurs. And I don't remember exactly when it was, but he's like, hey, what would you want to do long term? And I told him, at some point I'd love to come and teach and share kind of the things that have helped me along the way. And he's like, oh, well, we have this class. And that's kind of what led me to teaching at UC Berkeley. I started there again. I started co-teaching in the spring of 2016, but got my first class in that fall of 2016. So going on my 5th year here next year teaching. And I teach at what we call our Satarja Center for Entrepreneurship and Technology here at UC Berkeley. And I also teach in our Berkeley global programs, which are some of our global access programs for students around the world. I do some other teaching and speaking and coaching specifically with entrepreneurs, Benjamin, as you know. And of course, I love to help entrepreneurs from the Valley, considered some of the underdogs, if you will, because I know that was certainly myself and my journey. I guess other than that, I think it's been really unique. I've been able to be a part of the entire ecosystem, meaning I've started my own company and sold it for, millions of dollars. I've also been able to go through high growth, couple $100 million to over $500 million. Another company from $500 million to over $1 billion company and an IPO. Worked with venture capitalists, have been able to be I don't want to say immersed, but being around a lot of these different things to see a lot. And I think that's been very helpful, at least in my perspective, as far as learning, being able to help other entrepreneurs as they go on this journey as well.
Excellent. Well, thanks for sharing all that, Stephen. One of the things that I've always found fascinating about your perspective here is you've seen a lot of patterns in entrepreneurship and what works and what doesn't work. And wanted to dive a little bit further into maybe a little bit of your coaching philosophy here, because as we've discussed, you're able to basically find entrepreneurs that have some core attributes that you find have some key potential for the future, and help them develop to almost resemble closer to multiple exit founders with experience here. Before we go into what that resembles, what are some of the key attributes that entrepreneurs need to have in the early stages to basically continue along that developmental process? Like, what do you look for when you're deciding if someone's going to have an indicator of success?
It's really interesting, right? Because there's no one person for sure has everything at the time. And what I mean by that is, when I'm teaching this specifically on campus, we do a lot of case study, and we use cases because it's good to see the stories of some of these founders. And what I love about this is that you can see people at different snapshots at their life. And so I'll use Oprah because she's one that I think is just an amazing human. And if you know her story, right, as a child and as she's gone through, she was not always the Oprah Winfrey that we know now. Right. And so if you were to go and take a slice, right, and this is when I do this in class, we have read this case and there's a point where she had some just hardships. And I asked the class this question: if you met Oprah right now when she was 19 years old, would you have recognized her as the Oprah now? And the reason I ask this question is because what it gets to, and this is what I want every one of you who's an entrepreneur to understand, is Oprah was not always Oprah, right? There was a point in her journey that she was unrecognizable from the person she is today. You would not have known her. And if you understand that, and you understand then this concept of everything that has gone up into this point where we're at in our lives is finite. We can't change it. But the future is infinite. There's different possibilities based on choices, based on mindsets, based on environments that we can go through. Then you can relate that to entrepreneurship. And it relates to entrepreneurship in the sense that right now, a founder that you may see right now, and Benjamin, this was the point that you made, I believe that everything can be developed. And so what you want and what I look for are people who learn, people who can adapt, and then people who can teach, who can share, who can captivate. And it doesn't have to be, this huge emotional, like, they're Steve Jobs. You could look at Jeff Bezos, who's more reserved, or Elon Musk, who's a terrible public speaker, but they have this ability to captivate and teach other people about what they're doing. And so that's what I look for, right? Is who can learn and who wants to learn, who can adapt, and then who can then go on and teach. Because I think if you have those three key attributes, you're going to be able to do it. You're going to, meaning when I say do it, you're going to be able to be successful in whatever you do. You have to be able to constantly be learning. You have to be able to constantly be adapting, and you have to constantly be able to teach others around you. So I think those are probably the key attributes, Benjamin, that I would say I look for.
And maybe just elaborating a little bit further onto the first time entrepreneur perspective is, what are some of the key missteps or misconceptions that you see first time entrepreneurs applying to their businesses? So I know you mentioned, for example, like constantly learning. Example answer I would suggest would probably be along the lines of, someone assuming that they know their industry in and out and there's nothing left to learn. Their experience speaks for everything. But just from your perspective, you've seen these patterns over and over. What do you see as some of these common misconceptions or common missteps for first time entrepreneurs?
Oh man, there's so many. I think one is the overconfidence that they know everything, right? There's a difference between wanting to be a knower and wanting to be a learner. Right. I don't know if it's Mark Andreessen or Paul Graham who always talks about strong beliefs loosely held.
Yeah.
Right. It's a very famous saying in Silicon Valley. And so it's that ability to understand that there's stuff out there that you don't know. And it's important to have those, when I teach this on campus, we talk about these rings of circles, and the most outer circle, there's three rings, and the outer circle is everything that you don't know,
Mm-hmm.
And as you start to understand that as a founder, you're able to be that learning creature, right? You can have great ideas, but then you have to kind of learn, okay, how do I get from this point here to this point here? And what most people think, and here's the mistake I think that new founders make, is they think, oh, here's the path, or here's the path, whatever the path is. And they mistake that path for the journey that it actually might take to get there. And that's one of the big things that separates, I think, what we call the flounders from the founders. The founders understand that this path is probably not going to be linear. I may have to double back and go all the way around, and that's okay, right? The flounders are so set that, no, I know this is the path, that they're not open to the possibility that is not the path, and they're going to have to do something else, and therefore they don't adapt. Right. So I think that those are for early stage. I think the other thing for early stage is lack of confidence.
Yeah.
Right. Because there's a difference between confidence and arrogance.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You want someone who's confident that they're going to succeed. What you don't want is someone who's so arrogant that they're not open to learning and to feedback and to being wrong. Right. Many of the assumptions I made at my first two startups were wrong. Completely wrong. And there was a point where I had to go, oh shit, I don't know if I can cuss. Oh shoot, I was wrong. It's okay, Grace. Okay. Shoot, I was wrong, and I need to course correct.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of first time founders, they think they're Steve Jobs incarnate. And they're just like, oh, I know, because Steve Jobs did it this way. Well, actually, if you start talking to people who know Steve Jobs, you actually learn that he learned a lot, and he was persuadable. You had to have a good case. And many times he wanted to get it to the right decision. He didn't have to be right himself personally. And this is something I think that new founders have to go through and experience. Many times they just get beat up, and I don't mean physically, I mean mentally, right? Because there's so much negativity coming at them in every way, shape, and form.
Yeah, no, that's fairly interesting. So let's take your analysis to some of the founders that that you would consider successful, and they have the right pattern of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they have multiple exits. How do they approach the entrepreneurial journey from scratch? Like what are some of the key elements that, let's say if our audience here was transported to watching them work, what are some of the things that maybe we wouldn't project to see them doing or even conceive of them doing, but you've seen them do?
This is going to sound weird, but what they do is really not all that different. It's hard. The nuance of what they physically do is not that different. Where it starts to get interesting, at least in my perspective, is in a couple of realms, right? And these realms, I'll use the three realms that I think really differentiate that you will start to notice if you start having conversations, and then if you start to like see, you'll notice them. And the first realm is their mindset. Right? The mindset of successful entrepreneurs is completely different.
Yes.
And this is something, Benjamin, as you know, I talk about a lot. Having grown up in Fresno, there is something that we call the Fresno mindset. At least I call the Fresno mindset. I don't think everybody there calls it. And there's also a Silicon Valley mindset. I say this a lot, especially in executives, when I'm working with executives, because they want to know, how do I have this Silicon Valley success in my company? And the first thing I tell them is, look, Silicon Valley is not just a physical place. It is a mindset. And so what you'll start to notice is that the founders who are really successful may have the same mindset as everyone else to start out with, but then they start diverging. It starts becoming different, and it gets to a point where it's very noticeable, right? And this is the thinking. If you've ever read 0 to 1, this is that 0 to 1 thinking, and it's this small progression of mindset and thinking that starts to shift and change. And as you diverge, you start setting apart from the crowd. And so that mindset becomes different. And the reason that's important is because that leads into the next thing. Your mindset then determines different actions that you take. Right? So you do something that's different than everybody else, right? Everybody's going this way. You do something that kind of goes that way. In, the strategy literature, they'd call this the blue ocean strategy, right? But the key to understand is that it's these actions, these one-off actions, that start to, again, diverge. So now you have a mindset that's different from everybody else, and you have actions that are different from everyone else. As time goes on, these one-off actions turn into different behaviors. And again, at first, everything looks the same, but as you go in time, the mindset is different, the actions are different, and then these repeated actions or behaviors start to be different. And that's how you see the gaps, right? And it's not until you actually see the gap that you know, oh, this person is way better than this cohort of everyone else.
Yeah.
Right? That's what you see after the fact. That's when you're like, oh, that's Steve Jobs. What you don't see is back here when he was, taking LSD and, calligraphy classes at Reed College and, living out of a van. If you saw that guy, you'd think he's a bum here, right? You'd be like, I'm not going to associate with that loser. While he was doing that, he was developing his mindset. He was starting to do actions that were different. Over time, that turned into behaviors and ways of thinking. And then down the road, it's Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's important, I think, for early founders, where are you on that journey? Right? Do you have the same mindset you have had for the past 6 months? If you do, that's bad. You haven't learned. You haven't grown. You've heard me say this a lot. There's the two most important curves for a founder. It's your business growth curve, right? Sales, revenue, customers, right? And then the other, so you have your sales, your growth, business growth. The other growth curve that's important is your personal growth. Here's the way this works. If your business growth line curve ever passes your personal growth curve, bad things happen. You will get fired, you will get replaced, or your company will fail. So that personal growth curve has to always be steeper than the business growth curve. And this happens everywhere. And it even happens to people like Steve Jobs. right? If you're not growing, you will get replaced. And so this is where I think the mental game, if you will, of entrepreneurship, of innovation, of achievement really starts to take in, is because as someone grows personally, they can handle more professionally, right? As they start to think differently, to use Apple's, I don't know why I'm on an Apple rant, but I am. As they do start to think differently, though, their actions become different. Over time, their behaviors become different. And that's when you start to see the separation. I don't know if that answered the question, but it gives
No,
you
it did.
the way that I'm thinking.
Well, and what I'd like to maybe focus in on is for the founder entrepreneur that's listening to this and figuring out, okay, I see the concept, for lack of better terms, I got to start testing, experimenting, doing something different. What are some of the ways to start stimulating that activity?
Mm.
How did it begin?
One is, we say this a lot, leaders are readers. You have to read. And this is something that a lot of people don't like, is that they think that once you found a company, you have this vision and you just, beat the drum and everybody goes to it. That is not the case. At least not the case in my experience. Maybe there's a couple people out there that can do that. In most of the cases that I've researched, the entrepreneurs that I talk to, what's happened is, yes, they may be beating a drum, but at night they're reading books, they're reading articles, they're going to conferences, they're constantly learning, they're talking to their old professors, right? They're getting the literature that they need. I don't think it's any surprise that you look at the Warren Buffetts or Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg's, Jeff Bezos, they all have these reading lists of books that they've read. Is that a coincidence? I think not. Right? They're constantly learning. And the thing is they're learning because they're curious, right? There's this curiosity that you have because they want to know more. And they feel like they have to constantly keep taking in because there's so much out there that they want to know, right? And again, this is a mindset. This is a complete mindset. And so if you are someone who's not, reading books, who's not reading the different industry trends, who doesn't go and look at other things, whether they're, fiction, nonfiction, who's just not culturally aware of things that are happening, unfortunately, there's someone else who is. And you don't know what they're reading. You don't know that they've read the past 10 books on market strategy, so they've developed their own strategy. What have you read? Nothing. Who do you think's going to win? Right? See, I think that's the other thing is for many founders, they realize that, wow, anybody can do this. If anybody can do it, I better do it because someone else will. The flip side is there's just too much, I don't know if it's worth it. Right? Do you see that difference in mindset? Right? That difference in mindset is going to drive someone. It's going to develop, the biggest trait that I look for is resourcefulness. I think that's the biggest thing that anybody has to develop. And if you have this, it doesn't matter, there's other people out there that say, it does. Yeah. I need to know more. Right. And you've seen this, Benjamin, on some of, I've had you talk to some of the founders that I know in some of the early pre-stage, and they have this curiosity, this thirst, this, how do I do this? Oh, we looked and we found this. And then they're constantly trying to bring in more and more information, more and more knowledge. And then they act, right? They go and do. These things are so important, but they get overlooked. What the founders do is they think and then they don't act. They're curious, but then they don't go read. They want to do something, but then they do the easy part. If starting a startup was easy, guess what? Everyone would do it. Everyone would do it. Everybody wants quick, easy, and fast. That's what everybody wants that. Unfortunately, it takes a long time. It's hard, and it's really, really, really difficult to be successful. And that's okay. I mean, I think again, you asked what really sets an entrepreneur over here. Well, these are the things that start here, but every one of those can be developed, right? I'm personally, I'll tell you personally, I'm a horrible reader. I'm very slow. It takes me a long time to read stuff. I try and read, 3 to 4 new books a month. I read, different articles and so forth. I was recently, I think I mentioned this to you a couple weeks ago, maybe it was a month ago now, this quarantine, who knows? But I was watching an interview with Charlie Munger. If you guys don't know who Charlie Munger is, he's Warren Buffett's business partner. He's like 90 ancient years old, sharp as a whip. And they asked him, how much reading do you do? And he's like, 20 to 30 books a week. Dude is 90 something years old. And I'm like, shit, I'm doing like 3 or 4 a month. God, now I'm sitting there thinking, okay, how do I start reading? But I'm a slow reader. But, I don't use that as an excuse. I use that as, okay, that's just something I have to do, and I'm going to go and do it. It's sad that most adults, after they graduate from their formal education, most of them will never pick up, I forgot what it is, it's like 1.2 books or something the rest of their life. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Right now that doesn't mean you have to read every book. Charlie skims some, finds the good parts of others, and that's fine. But the desire to want and more knowledge and to be curious, do you think that helps him?
Yeah.
Right? When most other people aren't reading all this stuff and he has, that gives him the edge. And the thing is anybody can do that. Right? I've had people say, well, I can't afford to buy all the books. Libraries. You know how much a library card costs? It's free.
Yeah.
It's free. The internet. It's free. You could Google almost anything you want to know. You want to learn Python? Google it. Right? You want to learn how to build your first web? Everything is there. Most people don't. And, I say this in my class all the time. Could anybody have done this? And they always like, yes. Did they? No. Right? Here's the big difference. Could people do it? Yes. Do they? Nope. And then people wonder, well, why are some successful and some aren't? Right? Why do some people just don't do it? That's it. And I think as founders, and this is, when I do my coaching with founders, this is really what I'm doing. Right, is what I'm trying to do is develop this mindset of curiosity, of growth, of not having to have all the answers, of figuring it out. This curiosity so that they develop resourcefulness. That's it. There's the secret. Founders who are more resourceful will be more successful because they'll figure it out, right? They don't give up. They figure out over, around, through, under, you name it, right? This business isn't going to work, close it down, do something else. There's just these attitudes that people have, and this mindset and philosophy that they start going down. Sorry, I didn't mean to go off on a riff, but I was excited sharing. I hope that's okay.
No, perfectly
Grace,
fine.
you're laughing at me. You're like, shh, Steven, you're just talking way too much.
I couldn't unmute myself, but no, I like it. I like the perspective. I wasn't just stuck on mute.
Yeah, hopefully you founders out there, if you have a startup, this resonates, right? Because I can tell you, having observed it in Silicon Valley, it's everywhere, right? Benjamin, you've seen it. It's in the results, right? There are proven results that show this and bear it out.
Well, one thing that I'd like to just kind of maybe dive a little more in depth on, speaking with some of the founders you work with, and just, I guess for lack of better terms, just relatively comparing them to your average entrepreneur you come across, at least I come across, I find that one of the main differences is beyond just the curiosity, which is key. There's almost how do I phrase this? A lack of expectation on themselves to be right. So what I found with the founders you worked with and speaking with them after working with you, found that they were more curious in learning about opportunities and discovering insights compared to having an expectation that I thought of this concept, we need to make this work. And if it doesn't, then it reflects poorly on me. So it's almost like, one, they didn't take things personally against themselves. Two, the curiosity level was high. And then three, the shift on the expectation or the objective was less on making a business and more about, I guess, just generally trying to understand if something's going to work or not. And I just want to set the foundation there. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, you bring up such a good point, because this actually goes down to BS, right? And everything comes down to BS. I mean, really, by the way, when I say BS, you know this, it's belief system. Okay, not bullshit, just so we're clear.
Good.
It all comes down to BS, to belief system. And now I do need to kind of throw out a little caveat. Some of the ones who you've met are people who've gone through our programs. And so they've had some belief system understanding specifically. And this belief system revolves around failure, right? And there's various studies and various things out there. I won't go into all of this, but the one thing you have to understand, and that I think the really successful founders do understand, it's still hard to grasp, is that failure is not fatal for the most part, right? Meaning, if the idea fails, they do not internalize the idea as themselves. They separate the individual from the concept, action, or whatever. Whereas other people have that married and wedded together, that if this idea fails, they are a failure, right? And so it's this self-actualization as it pertains specifically to the concept of failure and failing. And this is a very cultural thing as well, right? We see this when I teach internationally. You see different cultures who tend to be very risk adverse. They're not going to take on risk, because if something is perceived a failure, it's associated with that individual. And that is the worst possible thing for their person, their persona. Whereas the other people, and there's different exercises that we do to actually break this, right? You can actually mentally break this in people. We use some social psychology tools, but what we do is we disassociate failure and failing, right? Meaning that, yes, this person or this idea may fail, but the person is not a failure. As I like to say, a bend in the road's not the end of the road unless you fail to make the turn, right? And so you can constantly make these turns and pivots and go over, and they're like, oh, if that one didn't work, I could just come up with something else. And this is what you see. This is what you witness, right? You see this with people as they've gone through different pivots and adjustments of their company and their business model and their product. They had no problem, as we like to say, shooting the puppy, right? That's a nicer way. And we don't mean this physically. Okay. Please, founders out there, don't shoot puppies. They used to use the kill the baby, but that was like even worse. Like, you can't use that analogy, especially nowadays, right? But you don't want to shoot the puppy. You're afraid that if you kill your darlings that you're going to die. But that's what founders have to do if they want to get it right for the company. They want to get it right to move the idea forward. Is this thing that is holding them back, boom, they got to shoot it and they got to move on. They got to go. And that's what you're recognizing, right? What you've recognized is this difference in belief systems as it pertains specifically to failure. And if you have a belief system that you are not afraid to fail at an endeavor because you know it's not you that's failing, it's just this thing. And this is hard. I'm telling you, it's hard. Everybody, I still have it. Everybody has this, right? Because you're like, oh, I failed. I'm a failure. Yeah. The greater degree that you develop that ability to overcome it, the more likely you are to, I don't want to say take more risks, but to actually look at more and new opportunities. I'll say it that way. And yes, some of that does come with risk, but it's a risk in a way that typically is judged and hedged and all these other factors. I don't know if that helped or if I just.
Oh no, I did. And I'd like to, well, one thing that I've seen a few times is when someone comes mainly with, let's say they have an idea or a product, the obviously we could talk about, sourcing demand before the supply. I understand that from an entrepreneurial perspective, but there's an element where people go about with a hope that their product is going to change their future. So you mentioned this before, is I know a lot of times the entrepreneurs you work with are fairly young, in college. And we spoke a little bit about what happens after college too, in some cases, to where, for example, someone that's not satisfied with their job, what are some of the key kind of just self-evaluations entrepreneurs can do to make sure that they're truly in the right journey of entrepreneurship compared to, let's say, some vision of entrepreneurship or some unreality or trying to chase a different reality?
Well, I think there's a couple things on this. First is you have to understand, regardless of what you do, everyone is an entrepreneur, right? The biggest mistake I think people make is they think they actually work for a company. You don't. You work for yourself. Now, your company may be your best client. They pay you well, they give you benefits, but everybody is an entrepreneur, right? Everybody has to own their actions. Everybody owns that, right? And so there becomes then a point in time where people make this, again, this goes down to belief system, this trade-off in their mind. And the trade-off is what they perceive as security from a company or insecurity to start a new company. What they fail to recognize is that the person, even at the company, still works for themselves. They have to add value. See, employees don't get paid for the hour that they bring. They don't get paid for the time that they work on the job. They don't get, the salary is not because they're going to put in 40 hours. This is a huge mistake. Huge. And by the way, this is Fresno mindset. People get paid for the value they bring to the company. Right? This is universal. So whether the company is your own or someone else's, that's irrelevant. You're always working for yourself. You're always going to be compensated for that value, right? The law of compensation is, the demand for what you do, your ability to do it, and how easy it is to replace you, right? If you understand those three things, right? The demand for what you do, is there an actual need? Your ability to do it, if you do it better or worse than someone else, will determine how much you're going to get paid and how easy it is for them to replace you. Well, that's the same as an entrepreneur, right? The demand for what you do. This is your product or service that you're providing to the market. Your ability to do it. Does it actually solve the problem that people are going to pay for? And then what else is out there that they could do that is better, worse, cost more, cost less, right? Those three things are universal. And so the reason I work with young people a lot is because, one, I'm at college. There's actually research that shows, though, that the most successful entrepreneurs have at least 10 years of actual work experience as an employee. Some of my students found this they were using Crunchbase and a couple other huge data sets. And what they found, there was approximately 10 years of work experience as an employee is a predictor of if you are going to have a more successful company based on, they had to use Series B valuation so that there was an actual time trend. But this to me was very enlightening, right? Because as I said earlier, everything that I shared is a way, it's not the way. Every entrepreneurship journey is unique, right? You're unique. Us as individuals are unique. And so that's kind of a long way about talking about the trade-offs of being an entrepreneur or being an employee. And I'll tell you right now, employees get laid off. There's not job security. I just saw the thing from UC Berkeley. They're having furloughs, and these are tenured people, they have to do this. Everybody is an entrepreneur. And if everybody had that mindset and focused on the value creation, right? The value they bring to the company, the value they provide, it's the same as if you have your own company. Then you start to understand, well, gosh, everybody's an entrepreneur, right? There is no difference with age. There is no difference, now age, the reason age helps, and my speculation is it helps is because you've seen more, right? You had more go rounds. And so you can process mentally more, right? One of the things that I think students at Berkeley, some of the ones who you've met and that you've seen and so forth, who've gone through our programs, the only thing that's different is we've had them actually practice being entrepreneurs. We actually had them do it. That helps them, right? And if you've worked in a company, you've had that practice as long as you've learned, right? As long as you've adapted, as long as you can take that information and share it, teach, right? And so you start seeing how this all works and comes together. Does that make sense?
Oh, it's great. Well, and you mentioned the belief system, and I just want to make sure we cover this. Is what are some of the major limiting beliefs that you see entrepreneurs possess? And part two of that would be maybe some common ways to work past that or anything along those lines. But I'd be curious to hear more about those limiting beliefs or what holds on.
The biggest one, I mean, there's two really, really big ones, right? And you know this because I talk about these self-limiting beliefs all the time. The first one is imposter syndrome, right? That I am not good enough. I don't have the right connections. Oh, other people are better than me. And so you start to feel as if you can't do it. This is a huge one. And this actually precludes so many people from starting businesses, right? There's a lot of other issues with it too, is people feel as imposters that they're doing this. I mentioned this recently, I think on a call with you, when I was reading the book from Sheryl Sandberg. And, she had graduated from Harvard. She's, had this amazing career. And now she was the COO of Facebook. And she says, I felt like an imposter. And you're like, if you feel like an imposter and you've done all that, none of us have a chance. Well, that's because this imposter syndrome is there. It's in our mind. This is a belief system that we have. And it actually it spurs from the scarcity mindset, that there's only so much. And because there's only so much, I may not be good enough. So I think that's the big one is this imposter syndrome. All founders have it. I had it. Everybody is going to have it at some point. And it's something that they have to battle, right? The Fresno mindset, this is a huge part of the Fresno mindset. Huge part is people who feel they don't have the right connections. They're not good enough. They don't know. They can't do it. There's just so many of those things. The other one is what we would call survivor's guilt. And what this is where you actually start to have some success, and then you feel bad because other people around you aren't doing it. And so you start to self-sabotage, right? I'll give you an example. I was doing pretty well, came home, talked to some old friends, and they do that. Oh, Stephen, look at you, you're doing this and that. And, oh, aren't you special now? And they start to almost guilt you that you think you're better because you started to achieve more. And in your mind, you start going, oh my God. And there's this incongruence of your environment and what you're feeling. And it starts to make you doubt and question, this is survivor's guilt. Why am I the one? Why is this? This happens all the time. All the time. And so as you start looking at these two things, and by the way, this happens in entrepreneurship. This happens, Benjamin, in life.
Yeah.
Right? There are probably people on this call going, oh shit, I think that's me. Right? I had to battle this, right? No one is immune. No one is immune. And these are all part of our belief systems. These are all things that are programmed. Every single one of us in our life has an operating system. Right? And that operating system that we grew up with has a huge influence, right? The environment that we have, some of our biology and just, neurobiological things, and then our role models, right? As these things start to shape around us, they start to shape us. They ingrain this thing. And many times these people do it because they don't want to hurt someone, right? Oh, I don't know if you should do that. And then they start thinking, oh, should I do that? Oh, I don't know. That's really hard. And it's not because they want them not to do it. It's because they don't want them to do it and fail. And then they feel bad. Well, what happens is this starts putting a lid on that desire, on that curiosity, and they start going, and then they start imposing these things. Oh, well, if I do that, maybe I'm not. And then that, imposter syndrome starts coming in. And then if they do start to get ahead, they start getting that survivor's guilt. And there's, what the literature would call cognitive dissonance, where things don't agree. And so we start making up these stories, and these stories start influencing our lives. And so I lost my train of thought on all that stuff. But I think that the point is those are the two big ones: imposter syndrome and survivor's guilt, that founders really have to fight, and that you tend to overcome that when you're in a good environment, right? When you're around the right people. Right. Have you ever wondered why successful people always tend to hang around with losers? No! They hang around with other successful people. Why is that? Good question to ask, right? And this goes with all types of things, incomes, right? People who are lower income mostly hang around. Now, by the way, I'm not trying to say that that's bad. You shouldn't hang around with people at different incomes.
Sure.
But you have to understand is this environment starts to seep in, right? I was talking to a friend of mine, and he was going to this yacht party by the way, this was last year, not this year. Obviously he's locked down now. But he was going to this like huge yacht party with billionaires. And I'm like, dude, why didn't you invite me? He's like, I did. You couldn't come because you were in Portugal. I was like, okay, sorry. But now I'm like kicking myself. I should have gone to that, right? Who you hang around with matters, because their belief system starts coming into your belief system. That environment and those role models will definitely seep in, and you have to be on guard. You have to be really on guard.
Excellent. Well, and I want to turn over, if there's anyone in the audience that wants to ask a question, feel free to type it in. I'll ask one more here while we keep going. So obviously let's take an entrepreneur in Fresno or an entrepreneur in the rural part of California, for example. I know you mentioned reading. What are some of the other things that put them into environments or suggestions just to kind of grow that mentality and change that belief system for the positive? And you can be as harsh as possible as far as what your recommended actions would be, but I'm curious to see what your
first one. My first one is.
Yeah, I know.
Move. Get the fuck out. Sorry, I used an F-bomb. Look, sometimes you have to change your environment. And that change of environment is necessary for growth, right? You think of it as a tree. If you put a tree in just a little cup, it's only going to grow so far because the roots can't take hold. And so you need to find a more fertile field. And what many people don't understand is they have to find a more fertile field. Sorry, my mouth doesn't work right now. They have to grow. They have to be challenged. For me, I had to move out of Fresno. I love Fresno. I come back all the time. My parents are there. My family is there. But I know the mindset that I've developed outside of Fresno has helped me immeasurably. And I don't know if it would have been developed the same way as in Fresno. Now, by the way, I'm not telling all of you who are in Fresno or wherever you are that you have to move. I think nowadays it's a little different because we have like the internet, we have Amazon that can ship you the books. I mean, there's all these things that you can learn. There's online forums, there's people that you can follow. where you can start absorbing these other things that are out there. And I think that's the key, is how can you absorb as much as you can that is in the right environment and mindset that you want to be. You hear me say this a lot, right? You have to see it to be it. You have to be it to do it. Right. And what I mean by that is that if you want to be successful, you have to be able to see success. And the way you do that is you see other people around you. You know, some of the motivational gurus, Tony Robbins, used to always call this modeling. And it's actually a neurological thing in the brain. I won't get into that, but you have to be able to see it. And if you're in an environment where you're not seeing successful people, successful founders, you're not hearing them talk, you're not getting that mindset into you, you're not reading the books that they read, you're not going to develop to that level. It's just not going to happen. You have to have those things. And so you have to see it. Now, once you see it, now you can be it. You can be that person. You actually, you know, in the brain wiring, again, I won't get into myelination and some of this other stuff, but you actually start to become that person, right? There's a saying that sometimes gets a lot of bad rap, is fake it till you make it. And there are some elements that could be bad on that. But the other element to that is modeling. As you start doing things, you start to develop the talents, right? You know, people, when they practice sports, they don't ever say, don't, you suck at tennis, so don't practice. No, you're faking it. You're pretending. And as you pretend and practice more and more and more, you get better and better and better and better and better until you're a world-class tennis player. Yeah. Right. But people don't think of that as they're learning, as they're developing a business. They're thinking fake it till you make it is bad, but that's what everybody do. This is what world-class performers do. And so you have to develop kind of that mindset and be in that environment. So my first thing is, if you can't move, you need to, you know, use social media now, I think is a little rough, but find the right blogs to read, right? If you're in tech, Y Combinator. Paul Graham has so many great blog posts that are amazing, right? The books that they've read. Just that alone is going to start having you thinking different, that most people are not, right? Getting your domain expertise, right? Being that constant learner and curious, that curiosity. Those things I think are going to help. Obviously, I'm a big proponent of read. Nowadays, you don't even have to read. There's podcasts. You know, there's YouTube videos. There's so many other ways to get this. Now, the one caveat I will say this is, there's so many voices, it can be overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And so what I like to tell people is, like, listen to one true voice at a time, right? It's okay to take in other stuff, but try and find like one body of work at a time that you're going to really take on and learn that and be that, and then take on another body, because some of them are going to be competing. Right. And this person says, oh, you should do this. And this person says, oh, you should do that. And this person says, oh, you should do this. And then you hear, oh, you should do this and you should do this. And you end up shooting all over yourself. There's just too much. Right. So you have to kind of find that medium. And this is where you have to find you, right? Where are you at? What do you think you need to know? Like I can get into the neurobiology of this. Is it comes down to what we call worms, right? Your working memory, your ability to elaborate on different concepts and ideas, your recall, right? Ability to bring things up as you need it, your metacognition, which is understanding how things are happening, and then self-regulated learning. Those are what have to happen in your brain to develop into an amazing entrepreneur. The way that happens is you have to be exposed to all these things. Does that help, Benjamin? I don't know if that helps.
It does. That's kind of what I was looking for as an answer. Well, I know we're getting towards the end here. Any final comments? And one thing I'd like to leave with the audience here is there any books, besides the closing comments, is there any books or materials? You've mentioned a few, but just one more time. What stands out? If you can make just a short list of recommendations, would love to hear.
Oh my gosh, there's so many. I think for blogs, Paul Graham's from Y Combinator. If you're in tech, I think that's must. There's so many good things that he's had on there. Books, again, it depends on what stage you're in. For someone who's a brand new founder in technology or basically any business, there's a book that's my go-to book that I have to have them read. It's called Sprint. If they're building a product that needs to be sticky with consumers or business people, I usually have them read Nir Eyal's Hooked. I think those are two just really good technical product books that people should learn. But there's so much out there. If you want to learn about venture capital, read Venture Deals, or actually Secrets of Silicon Valley. That's a really good one too. You'll learn about term sheets. You'll learn about all the things that you really need to know about if you're a founder and going through this process. I think the other thing is making sure you understand your domain, right? Making sure you're keeping up with your trends in your domain, so that you kind of see what's out there. There's no dearth of shortage of information that you can have. The shortage of people who are going to take that information and then act on it. I think that's the biggest challenge is as you learn all this stuff, then what do you do? How do you apply it? Right. It's one thing just to learn it. It's the other thing to learn it, process it, analyze it, and then actually make a change or do something that's different.
Excellent. Well, Stephen, I want to say thank you for joining us today. Appreciate hearing all your insights and thoughts. We'll have this recorded, so it'll be on our website. So if anyone wants to reference it and listen to certain sections again, feel free to do so. We've switched to a monthly schedule, so next month we'll be sending out another webinar. So check out your emails and stay tuned for the next one. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Bye-bye.
Thank you.